Prince Harry has met his father, King Charles, for the first time in 19 months.
There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down. I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better. There's a lot that can happen between now and then.
In a move that shocked the monarchy, Prince Harry has signed the Highgrove Accord with his father, leaving Meghan furious. Without informing anyone, he made a decision that could change his family's future forever. Why would Harry agree to such a secret deal, knowing the consequences for his marriage? And what drove King Charles to insist on this arrangement so urgently? Join us as we unpack why Meghan is furious after Harry secretly signed the Highgrove Accord with King Charles. The fallout. When Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back from royal life, the world did not immediately understand what it was witnessing. At first, it sounded temporary. On the 8th of January, 2020, the couple released a statement on Instagram saying they intended to step back as senior members of the royal family, split their time between the United Kingdom and North America, and become financially independent while still supporting the Queen. It was presented as a restructuring, not a severance. But it quickly became clear that this was not a sabbatical. It was a rupture. A senior royal was leaving the system entirely, relocating thousands of miles away, and severing himself from the daily machinery of the British monarchy. This kind of move had never happened before, not in modern history, and definitely not at this level. Royals had abdicated, yes. Others had faded quietly into obscurity. But a prince born into the direct line of succession announcing his departure on social media, bypassing traditional palace channels, and choosing North America over the crown was a first. The palace was caught off guard. Within days, an emergency meeting was convened at Sandringham, described by the press as extraordinary and without modern precedent. For an institution that survives on predictability and traditions, Harry's approach made the palace look exposed. But that was just the least of the palace's worries. What followed the relocation was far more damaging. Almost immediately after leaving, Harry and Meghan began speaking. At first, it was just formal statements expressing their discomfort with the system. But they did not limit themselves. In a televised interview, watched by millions worldwide, the couple described feeling unsupported by the institution. Meghan spoke openly about struggling with mental health while pregnant and said she had been denied help. They described being left exposed to relentless tabloid scrutiny, claiming the palace intervened to protect other family members while remaining silent when attacks were directed at them. Then came the allegation that changed everything.
Squashes this idea that somehow my wife was the one who destroyed the relationship between these two brothers.
Meghan said that during her pregnancy, conversations within the royal household had taken place about how dark her child's skin might be. The implication was huge. For the first time, a senior royal was publicly suggesting racial bias inside the monarchy itself. Although the palace responded immediately with a short statement acknowledging that recollections may vary, silence on specifics allowed the accusation to linger. And just when the palace thought it couldn't get worse, the book came. Harry's memoir went further than interviews ever could. It transformed grievances into a permanent record. He wrote in detail about his mother's death, recounting being told of the accident, his disbelief, and the long silence that followed. He described visiting her grave years later, admitting he still struggled to accept she was gone. For many who remembered the events of 1997, these passages reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The book also detailed private arguments within the royal family.
Anything that I've written and anything I've included is ever intended to hurt my family.
Harry described confrontations with his brother, moments of physical tension, and a relationship defined by rivalry and resentment rather than unity. He portrayed palace life as emotionally restrictive and hierarchical, where individual well-being was often secondary to institutional optics. What had once been dismissed as tabloid exaggeration was now presented as first-hand testimony. From the palace's perspective, this was no longer a family disagreement. It was a strategic problem. Trust collapsed. The long-standing assumption that family matters would remain contained behind palace walls no longer applied. Every interaction with Harry now carried risk. Anything said privately could be recorded, remembered, and later published. Silence, once the monarchy's most reliable defense, had lost its protective power. Charles, then Prince of Wales and later King, faced a more complex dilemma. He was both father and future sovereign. Defend the institution too aggressively and he risked appearing emotionally distant or vindictive. Say nothing, and the narrative continued to harden without resistance. People also had a lot to say. Some accused Meghan of being the instigator, of being an outsider who could not adapt to royal life, and of encouraging her husband to abandon it. Others argued Harry was finally asserting independence long denied to him. But regardless of where blame was assigned, one fact remained unchanged. Harry was still the king's son, and yet the fallout from their departure was beginning to threaten that birthright in ways Harry may not have anticipated. What more does Harry stand to lose? The elephant in the room. At the heart of this story is a role most people barely notice until it matters: Counselor of State. Under the Regency Acts, Counselors of State are the monarch's spouse and the next four in the line of succession who are of age and domiciled in the United Kingdom. They are legally empowered to act on behalf of the sovereign. They can sign routine papers, hold Privy Council meetings, and even deliver the King's speech at the state opening of Parliament. For King Charles, this created an immediate and pressing dilemma. The working pool of counselors had dangerously shrunk. With the Queen Consort likely to be at his side, the only active, duty-performing royal left from the official list was his heir, Prince William. Yet the law requires counselors to act in pairs. This law left the monarchy's operational continuity resting on the availability of individuals who had formally withdrawn from public life: Prince Andrew and, crucially, Prince Harry. Prince Andrew, however, was never a viable candidate for any such solution. He was in a lot of trouble. Prince Andrew's problems are from a deep, long-standing association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, not a procedural or constitutional matter. The crisis reached its zenith with the civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre, who alleged she was trafficked by Epstein.
I wasn't even in the category of being a human being. I was just a toy to be used.
And forced to have sexual encounters with Andrew as a teenager. Despite his denials, Andrew settled the case out of court in February 2022 for a reported $12 million, making a substantial donation to Giuffre's charity without admitting liability. These allegations were increased by others, including an accuser who stated in 2020 that Andrew abused them as a child, and his disastrous 2019 BBC Newsnight interview, where he showed a lack of empathy for Epstein's victims and offered widely mocked defenses. In response to the escalating scandal, the monarchy took a series of steps to distance the institution from Andrew. Following the Newsnight interview, he was made to step back from public duties in November 2019. In January 2022, after Giuffre filed her lawsuit, Queen Elizabeth II stripped him of his military affiliations and royal patronages, and he ceased to use the style His Royal Highness in an official capacity. King Charles imposed the most severe sanctions in October 2025. After discussion with the king, Andrew relinquished his Duke of York title and membership in the Order of the Garter. Shortly after, King Charles initiated a formal process to remove all of Andrew's remaining styles, titles, and honors.
To remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew.
And served notice for him to vacate his royal residence, Royal Lodge. However, for Harry, the difference was huge. Even though he had issues with the palace, Harry had not been linked to any scandal. But there was a catch. A huge catch that could destabilize the life the Sussexes are trying hard to build. Would Charles make the call, or would he respect his son's new life? The secret meeting. When Prince Harry received the sudden call from his father, he did not know what to expect. It was not just sudden, but King Charles had also asked him not to inform anyone that he was coming. No explanation was given, and Harry did not press. Years inside the institution had taught him that questions rarely produced answers. But Harry was curious, and so he agreed. He told his wife he was traveling briefly for a charity commitment. A lie, that would come to bite him in the rear later on. When Harry arrived at Highgrove House, Charles was waiting. Age had altered the king, making him thinner and his movements more economical. He stood, embraced his son briefly, and together they entered the orchard room, a family space. Framed photographs lined the walls, moments frozen from a life once governed by ritual. The choice of room was deliberate, as the sentimental pictures could evoke some nostalgia in Harry. As soon as they sat, Charles didn't waste time and began to speak. But he did not speak about the past. Instead, he talked about structure and continuity. He explained it methodically, about how when the monarch is unavailable, councillors of state are empowered to act in pairs on the sovereign's behalf, about how they sign documents, authorize functions, and ensure the machinery of state does not stall. As Harry listened, he simply assumed this was just a reminder that his position still existed on paper. He was not being asked to return, only to remain available in theory. And that was until Charles introduced the complication. Under the Regency Acts, eligibility was conditional. Councillors must be of full age in the line of succession and domiciled in the United Kingdom. The word settled between them: domicile. Harry's life, as it existed now, did not meet that threshold. His home, his children, and his work were in California. In fact, he had stated publicly that the United States was his primary residence. Of course, Harry had a home before relocating to the States, but it was the palace itself that formally requested the couple vacate their Windsor home. The request came just days after Harry's memoir Spare was published, a move widely seen as a final severance of their official ties to the UK. The cottage, a gift from the late Queen, was more than a house. It was Harry's last legal anchor point in Britain. Its loss meant he was, for all constitutional purposes, adrift. Removing Harry outright would require fresh legislation, parliamentary debate, and public scrutiny, a confrontation the Crown could not afford. Yet doing nothing left a statutory role occupied by someone who could not legally act in it. Neither option was acceptable. There was, Charles said, another path.
For Harry and Meghan, as they continue to build their lives overseas.
A private, administrative accommodation. Harry had to become a UK-based resident again, specifically at Highgrove, sufficient to satisfy the statute's domicile requirement without altering the public narrative. Harry understood immediately what was being offered and what it would cost. Accepting would re-establish a legal connection he had worked to sever. It would not undo the past, but it would complicate it. It would exist in tension with the life he had built and the promises that life was founded on. His mind turned inevitably to his family, to Meghan, who had built a new life on the principle of a clean break, to Archie and Lilibet, whose relationship with their grandfather and their British heritage was fragile, mediated entirely by distance and security disputes. Just months earlier, Harry had stated publicly that it was impossible to bring his wife and children to the UK due to the lack of guaranteed police protection. A government review of his security status was underway, but its outcome was uncertain. For Harry, it could be the leverage needed to resolve the security impasse and, one day, bring his children to their grandfather's home without fear. It was a thread, however slender, tying their future to a legacy he had renounced. The cost would be a secret kept from his wife, a contradiction planted at the heart of the independence they had fought for. He did not respond at once. The room fell into a heavy silence. The years it had taken to leave, the language of escape, and the understanding that departure was permanent, all of it pressed in. Signing would not mean going back, but it would mean conceding that leaving was never as legally absolute as it felt. Charles did not push, he waited. The decision had to be voluntary. Anything else would fail. Eventually, documents were placed on the table. Harry read them, hesitated, and then he signed. But will Harry be able to endure the consequences of that signature? The cost of silence. Meghan Markle believed her husband had gone to one of his routine charity events, but the way he completely disappeared began to worry her. At first, she assumed it was logistics. maybe delayed flights or events that ran longer than expected. But as the hours passed, something became difficult to ignore. There were no photographs of her husband at the charity event, and for someone whose movements were typically documented, even incidentally, the absence was conspicuous. Thankfully, Meghan had access to her husband's location, and so she checked, silently hoping Harry wasn't cheating on her. But when she saw his location, her heart sank. Harry was not at a charity event. He was at Highgrove. By the time Harry returned, he saw it in her face that she knew. She did not even ask where he had been. She just asked why he had lied. Harry knew instantly that he had to tell his wife every single thing, and so he began to explain. The call from his father, the insistence on secrecy, the legal framework, the residency clause, the lease, the signature. He spoke carefully, trying to make it sound procedural rather than personal. It did not work, because, for Meghan, this was not an abstract constitutional maneuver. It collided directly with her own history. She knew estrangement intimately. She knew what it meant to draw a line and hold it. Her relationship with her own father had collapsed publicly and painfully, and she had lived for years under scrutiny because of it. When he became seriously ill, when he underwent amputations and spoke openly about his inability to reach his daughter, she did not return to Britain. Not because she was unaware, not because she was indifferent, but because she believed that boundaries once set mattered. She had said she could not reach him. He had said he could not reach her. The silence between them became permanent, and that decision had not been hers alone. It was something Meghan believed she and Harry had agreed on together, that they would protect their family unit, focus on their children, and stop being pulled back into relationships defined by pressure or institutional expectations. There had been other meetings before, earlier visits Harry had made openly with her full knowledge and consent. Those encounters had been challenging, but honest. She had supported him through them, publicly even. There had been no deception then, so why now? Why hide this one? And while Meghan's anger was visible, contained but unmistakable, there was another reaction unfolding elsewhere in the family. How would the heir react when he finds out how close his father brought the enemy? A betrayed heir. If William had not been surrounded by people who understood the stakes, people who still believed instinctively that the heir should know when something sensitive was happening inside the monarchy's walls, he might never have known Harry was there at all. And that was the problem. Harry had returned to Britain quietly. He had gone straight to Highgrove. He had met with the king, and when he left, there was no briefing at all. So he confronted his father not as a son, but as the heir. William demanded to know why his brother had been summoned in secrecy, why a private meeting had taken place without his knowledge, and why a decision with constitutional implications had unfolded beyond his line of sight. Charles had little choice but to explain, so he told his son everything, and William listened attentively before losing his patience. When the fallout began, William stayed and absorbed the ripple effects. He stood in silence while accusations circulated globally. He represented stability while his brother monetized rupture. He did not respond publicly. He did what heirs are trained to do, endure. And now, after everything, Harry had been brought back into the operational framework of the monarchy without William's involvement. That was what enraged him. William had been the one holding the institution together when it was most exposed. He had worked under the assumption that he was doing so alone, and now he was being told, after the fact, that his brother was still considered essential to the machinery of the crown. It raised questions William had not expected to ask. Did his father believe he could not handle the burden alone? Or worse, did he think that public legitimacy still flowed more easily through his younger son? What William did not yet know was that the decision had never been about choosing between sons. What else was Charles hiding under the guise of this deal with Harry? A father's sacrifice. King Charles had never been a man who acted with that level of personal involvement unless the matter cut close to the bone. By the time he ascended the throne, he was no longer a man planning for decades ahead, but one acutely aware of time passing, of chapters closing, and of relationships that might not survive indefinitely if left unattended. His reign began under the weight of illness, and a monarchy still absorbing the shockwaves of internal fracture. In that context, the question of his sons loomed larger than statutes or parliamentary fixes. His annual Christmas address for 2025 made that clear. Again and again, he emphasized reconciliation, unity, healing, and continuity, not as political slogans, but as personal convictions, framing the monarchy not as a fortress, but as a family bound by shared history and shared responsibility. To those listening closely, the emphasis was unmistakable. In that moment, Charles was not merely a king speaking to a nation. He was a father speaking into the void, hoping his words might still reach those who had drifted beyond his immediate orbit. Keeping Harry legally tethered to Britain was, in that light, not an act of control, but of proximity. It ensured that the door would never fully close, that physical distance would not harden into permanent absence, and that opportunities for quiet contact, shared time, and eventual understanding would remain possible. Charles was not forcing his son back into service or demanding public loyalty. He was preserving access, preserving presence, and preserving the chance that what had broken might one day be repaired. And for that, Charles was willing to absorb criticism, risk misunderstanding, and even alienate William in the short term, because the alternative was watching his younger son drift further away until reconciliation became impossible, not by choice, but by circumstance. Harry's sacrifice was different, but no less significant. When he stood in that room and listened to his father explain the problem, he was not responding as a counselor of state or a constitutional actor. He was responding as a son confronted with the visible reality of an aging parent. Whatever anger, resentment, or fatigue he carried into that meeting collided with something more difficult to ignore: the physical presence of a father who no longer looked unshakable, whose authority was now paired with vulnerability. Harry did not sign because he wanted to re-enter royal life, nor because he felt obligated to assist William, nor even because he believed in the institution that had wounded him. He signed because walking away again, this time with finality, would have meant accepting that the distance between him and his father was permanent, and that was a cost he was no longer willing to pay. There was also another calculation sitting beneath the emotional one. Harry understood that his choices did not end with him. Whatever status he retained or lost would ripple outward to his children. Severing every remaining legal tie to Britain might satisfy his own sense of independence. Still, it would also expose his children to consequences they had no role in choosing, including the erosion, inheritance, titles, and future options that could never be restored once surrendered. As a father, that mattered. Sacrifice, in this case, did not look like surrender. It looked like a compromise. It meant accepting a limited, uncomfortable connection to a past he had tried to escape to protect a future he could not yet fully see. It meant carrying the weight of his wife's anger, the strain on his marriage, and the accusation of betrayal, because refusing the offer would have closed doors not just for him, but for those who depended on him. The Highgrove Accord was born of fear and responsibility. One father refused to let go of his son, and another refused to let his children pay the price for unresolved conflict. Do you think Charles and Harry are taking steps toward reconciliation? And do you believe there's a chance for William and Harry to share a bond again? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.